The night before our wedding, my mother took me aside and told me the most important thing she knew about marriage. She said, "Keep your own money." Not because she didn't trust my Raymond. She trusted him fine. But she'd watched her own mother go cap in hand to her father every time she needed a new pair of stockings, and she'd sworn that would never be her daughter. I listened. I didn't fully understand. Not yet. This is a fictionalized composite story, inspired by the lives of many ordinary British women of this era. The names, details, and events have been changed and blended, but the feelings, those are true. My name, in this telling, is Margaret. I was born in 1941 in a terraced house in Coventry, which means I came into a world that was already on fire. I don't remember the bombing, but I remember the aftermath of it. The smell of damp brick and scorched timber that hung over certain streets long after the war was finished, as though the city itself hadn't quite forgiven what had happened to it. We had a yard at the back, with a privy that frosted over in winter, and a kitchen that my mother kept so clean it might have been a surgery. There were 4 of us children. We ate everything on our plates. We wore everything until it wore out. That was simply the way of things, and we didn't think it unusual because everyone around us lived exactly the same. I left school at 15 and went to work as a typist at an insurance firm on the high street. This was 1956. I was quick with my fingers and quicker with my sums, and within 18 months, I was the fastest in the pool. The supervisor, a man called Mr. Hollis, once told me I had a fine commercial brain. He said it the way you'd compliment a dog for fetching the paper. I thanked him and went back to my typewriter. Raymond came into my life in 1962 at a dance hall in Birmingham. He was doing his national service when I met him. A Coventry boy posted not far away, back for the weekend in a jacket that was slightly too short in the sleeve. He asked me to dance with the kind of blunt directness that I found either very rude or very honest. And I've spent 60 years deciding it was the latter. He worked in manufacturing after he was demobbed. Nothing glamorous. He assembled parts for industrial machinery in a plant outside the city, and he was serious about it in the way that men of his generation were serious about their work, as though the alternative to seriousness was catastrophe, and perhaps, for them, it was. We married in the spring of 1963. I wore a dress my mother and I made together, from a pattern we'd kept folded in a drawer since 1959, waiting for the right occasion. The fabric was ivory, not white. We couldn't quite stretch to white. The reception was at the church hall. Ham sandwiches, a fruit cake my Aunt Edna had been feeding Brandy to since Christmas, and a Dansette record player belonging to a cousin who kept lifting the needle back to the beginning of the same Cliff Richard song until somebody told him firmly to stop. We moved into a flat above a pharmacy in Leamington Spa, 2 rooms and a bathroom with a geyser that made a noise like a man clearing his throat before it agreed to produce hot water. We were happy there, I think. We were certainly too busy to be unhappy. I went back to work within a fortnight of the wedding, which raised eyebrows. Married women at the office were expected to resign eventually, to start their families and disappear into domesticity as though they had never quite existed professionally at all. I didn't resign. Raymond didn't ask me to. This was, as it turned out, the foundation of everything. The money mattered practically, of course. Raymond's wage covered the rent and the basics. Mine covered everything else. A second-hand fridge, a proper coat, eventually a little car that I drove, and he pretended not to be nervous in. But it was more than the money. I was a person at work. I had colleagues, opinions, small daily victories. I solved problems. I had a desk with my name on a piece of card in a holder. And I cannot fully explain to you why that piece of card mattered, but it did. Our first child came in 1965, a boy, Thomas. I took 3 months and went back. My mother kept him on Tuesdays and Thursdays. A neighbor kept him the rest. I felt the guilt that every woman of that era felt. A grinding, low-level guilt that nobody had named yet, because the language for it didn't exist. Nobody had written books about it. Nobody had told us it was a reasonable thing to feel and a reasonable thing to push through. We simply pushed through it, because the alternative was to sit still, and sitting still had never been in my nature. Raymond was not a man who talked about his feelings, nor was I, truthfully. It was not the language we'd been raised to speak. What we had instead was a practical tenderness. He brought me tea when I was tired without being asked. I ironed his work shirts to a standard that I privately considered excessive, and he never commented on one way or another. When we argued, and we did argue, it was usually about money, or tiredness, or the way one of us had spoken to the other at a moment when patience had run out. We never argued about whether I should be working. That was settled. That was not available for argument. The children grew. Thomas, then Susan in 1968. The flat became a house. 3 bedrooms in a semi on a road where all the gardens were kept to roughly the same standard as a matter of unspoken neighborhood honor. I moved from typist to office manager by 1970, which meant a pay rise, and also meant that Mr. Hollis, long since retired, would never know what that fine commercial brain had gone on to do with itself. I took satisfaction from this, more than was perhaps entirely charitable. I took it anyway. And then, in 1974, Raymond's plant closed. Redundancy. 3 weeks' notice and a handshake from a man in a suit he'd never met before. He was 34 years old, and he stood in our kitchen that evening and told me with a face so carefully arranged to show nothing that I could see every crack in it. That was when I understood what my 2 incomes meant. It meant that we did not drown. It meant that the mortgage was paid. The children had their school shoes, and Raymond had 6 months to find his footing again without the desperate cornered quality that unemployment could press into a man like a thumbprint into soft clay. He found work again, different work, smaller wage, different hours, and the expression on his face when he told me gradually became less careful and more real. That is the thing I want you to understand. It was never about proving a point. It was never about the politics of it, though the politics came later, and I had opinions about those too. It was about something quieter than politics. It was about the right to be needed in more than one room of your own life. We marked our 40th anniversary in 2003. By then, the world had changed so completely that our children took for granted things we'd had to argue into existence simply by living them. Susan works in finance. Thomas's wife earns more than Thomas. Neither of them thinks this is remarkable, because it isn't. But I watch them. I watch the ease of it. And I feel something complicated, gratitude that they have it easier. A small, stubborn pride in what our generation built out of what we had. And occasionally, late at night, something that is almost grief for all the women I knew who didn't have a mother who said, "Keep your own money." Women who gave everything to a single room and found at the end that the room was very small. Raymond died in 2011, a good death, if there is such a thing, in his own bed, with me beside him, in the house we'd kept for 37 years. I still have my own bank account. I still think that matters. If your family lived something like this, a marriage held together by practicality as much as love, A working life that nobody quite made space for but you built anyway. I'd be glad to hear about it in the comments below. These stories belong to all of us.